Welcome back F11 members to part 2 of the fundamentals of post-production video tutorials for issue 37 January 2015. In part 1 we were talking about noise and what we can do about it, particularly with images shot with super high ISO settings. Now you may consider that noise is not something you need to think about when shooting at normal ISOs, and largely you'd be correct. At the normal default setting, ISO setting of 100, indeed right up to, depending on your camera, anything like 1600 or higher, noise is virtually indecipherable. But noise can creep up on you when exposures are long, or when adjustments in processing are particularly heavy-handed. So I've got this shot of mid-Wales on an autumn day, and I'd just like to show you how noise can become a problem, particularly in the shadows, if you start getting a bit too over enthusiastic with your shadow recovery, or you're boosting your levels. So let's just look at this image, and if I zoom in to 100%, it's crisp, it's clear. Okay, the image as is straight out of the camera looks pretty flat, but certainly noise is not something I need to be thinking about. I did shoot it at ISO 400 because I was on a hilltop, the wind was blowing, I was using a polarizer, and I couldn't keep the tripod steady, so I was shooting handheld, and up here you can see ISO 400, focal length 90mm, aperture f8 at 1/160th of a second. So as I said in the lowdown feature, that there are times when we do need to put the ISO up, not because we're just too lazy to carry a tripod, but because the conditions are against us, and this was one of them. Nevertheless, let's just look. If I do some of my basic adjustments, adjust the black point there, adjust the white points to suit, pull back highlights, all of this stuff is familiar to you now, I'm pretty sure. Add a bit of contrast, medium contrast to the picture, add a touch of a grad filter to the shot here. You know, it's really, you know, brings the image, which looks so sort of lifeless, straight out of the camera to us. Bring that exposure in the sky back, and that's not bad, is it? Just like that, the image is transformed. Now let's go back to where we started: flat, lifeless, and unimpressive, and now immediately a fair bit of oomph to the picture. I'm just going to go back, I'm going to dial in a touch of vibrance, and that would be an image that I'm quite pleased with. But again, I could look at this now and say to myself, yes, but I want more detail excuse me, down here in the bottom left corner of the image. So to bring some of that detail up, what I'm going to do is go pretty extreme on the shadow recovery there, and it starts pulling up detail in that bottom left corner of the image. I'm actually going to now go and just boost the levels. Go back to linear, ignore the main part of the image, and boost the levels quite considerably. Put a touch of contrast in as well, just so I'm getting detail there. That's way too much, of course, but now if I zoom in close and look at this area of the image, you can see I'm starting to get noise. Now if I come down to my noise reduction panel here, there's no luminance, or if I take color noise reduction out as well, you can see it's starting to creep in. Something to be aware of. Noise can affect shadow areas in particular when levels are boosted and shadow recovery is enabled at quite a high value. Now if I come back in the history of the image, back to where we came in really, to there and zoom back out, really what this illustrates is the advantage of getting your exposure right in camera in the first place. If I reset the image and go back to my initial exposure there, you can see my black point needs adjusting, but the histogram is biased as far to the right as possible, as is evident up here. Looking at the histogram, I've given it the maximum exposure I can while retaining all the highlight detail there. That's given me washed out shadows, but crucially as much information as possible is there. Signal to noise ratio is high, and thus the danger of noise creeping in when I need to boost levels or shadow recovery is minimized. Really is important for optimum image quality to make sure you have the best possible exposure and you are recording as much information as possible. Just as a tip, I would say to you, if you find yourself using shadow recovery at maximum levels, then you really ought to be looking into your shadows and asking yourself if you need to apply a bit of noise reduction. So what I'd like to do now actually is just to show you in Photoshop a related topic, i.e. the advantage of doing your processing in 16-bit as opposed to 8 bits color bit depth. So to do that, I'm going to export this picture and open it up in Photoshop. So I'll do that and I'll see you there in a second. So what I've got now is the same image open in Photoshop. One has been converted to an 8-bit TIFF, this one here, and one has been converted to a 16-bit TIFF. As is at the moment, they both look exactly the same, inseparable. I'm just going to reduce them so they're side by side next to each other, open in Photoshop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 8-bit TIFF and do some adjustments to it. I want to basically open up the levels and look at the histogram here and adjust my black point to suit. I can bring the black point all the way into there before I see any clipping, and my white point all the way to there, and I'm going to adjust the darkness of the image as well by moving the slider. I'm going to go pretty heavy-handed and make it look fairly rich, okay, just for the purpose of this particular exercise, okay, and go okay. And now I'm going to do exactly the same using the 16-bit TIFF. Image, adjustments, levels, and here I'm going to adjust my black point, I'm going to adjust my white point, and I'm going to bring the levels back to match the one on the right. Now, looking at the images side by side, there's nothing to choose between them. Click on OK. But actually there are some subtle differences if we look again at the levels. So keeping with the 16-bit here, go Image, Adjustments, Levels. There's the histogram display with all the different colors. I find that display a little bit confusing actually. And here's just my brightness histogram. If I go, it's the RGB brightness histogram. And as you can see, it's a nice smooth shape, a classic camelback shape with a perfect black and a perfect white point, okay? If I now look at the 8-bit, go Image, Adjustments, Levels here. Now it's a small thing, I grant you, but can you see the difference? It's much more jaggedy, much less smooth transitions. This looks like an arête in the French Alps to me, quite frankly. All spikes and and gorges and canyons. There's no smooth transition of tones, and this is because we've made those adjustments in 8-bit color. We haven't got the color information there that enables us to ensure those really smooth transitions of tone and color that come when we're processing in 16-bit color. What that manifests itself as is that purity of tone and gradation of tone that really sets apart a quality image when printed big. And this again is why it's so important to take care with our exposure in the camera, and again with our adjustments in post-production, and to hold on to as much information as we possibly can right through the process until the bitter end, and work in 16-bit color both in Lightroom and in Photoshop. Okay, so we've covered noise and we've covered 8 versus 16-bit. So quite a lot of technical stuff this month. I hope it's been of use. We look forward to your feedback as always, and your suggestions for future content in the online magazine. Thank you.